And welcome everybody to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we have a great show lined up for you today with the first episode of the podcast where we are going to be covering the MLC for this season. Before we get into all of that, just want to make sure to remind you to like, subscribe, and comment down below all your, any of your thoughts about what we talk about today. If you want access to our Discord server, we will have an MLC channel in there. I believe Phoenix is supposed to be archiving that or whatever, so that we have an MLC chat going in there. Join our Discord server, talk about that, all that stuff. If you want access to that, you can head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors or check out the link in the description. Joining me to talk about the MLC this year, returning as one of our greatest, probably what I would define as the greatest commentator about the MLC of all time, is Chris, otherwise known as your Commander Mechanic. How are you doing today, Chris?
Callahan, thanks for having me back. We did this last year. Looking forward to do it again this year.
Yeah, and this year we actually have it set up, and I have a staff this year too. So I can actually make the content that I wanted to make last year. So it's pretty exciting. So glad to have you back. Also joining us, instead of playing in it this year, former MLC player, Scotty, otherwise known as Scoots. How are you doing today, Scotty?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me. Love to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure. And we have a really great show lined up for you guys because we're going to be talking about the MLC draft that's coming up. Last week, we revealed the 155 deck draft class for this season. And people had feelings about what was included and what wasn't included, across the board. I could probably talk about just that all day long, but we're going to talk about the draft a little bit here and what we think might go on. And so the first thing to take a look at here is going to be the order of the draft. So the way this works is we didn't really talk about this a whole lot last week, so we're going to talk about it this week. Is the order this year is going to be in a linear order. People debate whether or not that was the correct choice, but that's what we're doing this year. So what's going to happen is Nick, who had the worst record in the MLC last year, he's going to get the first pick. And then everybody who's returning is going to be after the 10 new players, the 12 new players. The 12 new players were randomly sorted into the next 12 slots. And then from there on down, you have the returning players who missed the playoffs, who are going to be ranked by record, with ties being determined by a coin flip. That should make Ken very happy. Then the next category will be returning players who did make the playoffs. And that will be ranked by record as well. And then the final one, or the final two, are returning players who made the Mox Bold ranked by record. And the last pick will be the Mox Bold champion, which was Comedian MTG. So Ian has the last pick in the draft. He picked pretty close to the bottom last year too, so it didn't stop him. But so to go down for this draft order, like I said, Nick is the first in draft order. Second will be fellow Sculpty Boy Michael Levine. Third will be Manadork. Third will be Mord from Elsha's Infinite Army. Cobblepot will be picking fifth. Sixth is your fellow Who Brewed This cast member, Scotty. Claire Deco from cEDH Brazil is seventh. Flower from r/cEDH, she is eighth. Death from Veil of Death MTG is ninth. Ryan J, who, as for those on Twitter have seen, he has a beaver mascot that we made him to be his logo. So he's going to be drafting 10th. So that's your top 10. The next 10 picks is Islane from the Possibility Storm, Jim from the Spike Feeders, Silverboy from Casually Competitive will round out the new players who are drafting. Going on now, down at the 14th spot is Josh from Mind Muscle Magic, Killstars from cEDH Brazil, Kai from the Spellseekers, Fukins, Ken Bauman, obviously he's down there at 18th. 19th is Pontus. 20th will be Spleenface. 21st will be Sick Robot. Sage will be 22nd. Hellenium, he's wanting to go by Cody Howe this year. So Cody at 23rd. 24th will be Timmy T1000. And then the last down here, once we get to 25, we have Pongo, Shawnee at 26th. 27th will be Charles. 28th will be LJ. 29th will be Higher. 30th will be your other cast member, Cicada. And 31st will be Rebel, and the last pick will be Ian. So with that knowledge, we've brought Scotty and Chris in here to really... they've done some investigative journalism for us over the past week since this has come out, and we're really putting on our hard-hitting journalist facts here. So first things first, Scotty has news coming out of the Predatory Pickle Camp about that first pick. And Scotty, what is going on? What is Nick thinking with that first pick?
Yeah, so I talked to Nick at length about this, and he kind of ended up asking me, what do you think I should first pick? Because, I played last year, and so he said he was kind of torn between like Elsha, Najila, and his comfort pick, Magda. Mm-hmm. It's the deck that he plays the most. And I said, well, what deck do you feel the most comfortable with? And he said, that's it. I'm first picking Magda. So the Predatory Pickle Camp has expressed desire to take Magda.
So that's
as
very
the number
interesting,
one pick,
because that definitely, Chris, sets up a draft scenario where, last year we talked about this a little bit, where we were kind of not sure if LJ was going to take Edric in first pick or not. And he ended up taking Najila. So with that knowledge, the top five, what do you think that looks like? I know we've spoken about this. We aren't sure what Manadork is going to do. He's kind of the wild card. But as far as the rest of this goes, like what does it sound like, look like because of that?
Well, it really sounds like people are going to comfort pick for the first pass of the draft here. At least people are going to go with the decks that they have the most reps in, rather than just the generically accepted good decks. And if Nick sets that tone where people are picking their pet decks round one, then we could be all over the place here, and it's just going to be Wild West. Yeah.
If you look at the draft from last year, just to take a quick look, the upgrade that would be for Magda, by the way, from pick, is it would go from round 4, pick 127 to round 1, pick 1 in a year.
Look, I don't hate Magda going round 1, but pick 1 round 1. That's entirely on Nick. Magda puts up results. Recently was in the finals of the big Japanese God of Commander cEDH tournament that went as well. Granted, that meta is completely different, but still, it puts up results. It's a good deck.
It is a good deck. Scotty, when we were also talking about some other different aspects of this too, because the top 5 is, Nick, our fellow Sculpty boy, Michael Levine. And then we're looking at Mord, who is a mod in the Elsha server, Manadork at 3. And then you've got Cobblepot and Claire. And I know that Ken has a, a change.org petition.
change.org petition.
But when we look at that, like, Cobblepot's made it clear he intends to draft a Krark deck. And so when we look at, what as far as the 3 Krark decks, because we've got Coin Farm, we've got Thrasios Krark, and we've got Krark Sakashima. I mean, which of those do you think are going before Ken gets a shot at them?
Yeah, so it's kind of a toss up because I think that there's like 2 different kind of decks that Cobblepot could go with.
Is it a coin toss up?
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah. It's definitely a toss up though. It's a coin toss. Because I think Cobblepot will go with one of 2 decks kind of as their first pick. I feel like Cobblepot is kind of leaning definitely Teamer as pick number 1. Cobblepot traditionally plays Krakashimorvar, which is his Krark Thrasios brew. It's really layered, and I'm sure that's something he'd love to play in the MLC. But Cobblepot also plays some Teamer Pirates, and when I've played against Cobblepot in Conquest, Cobblepot's been on Teamer Pirates. So I think either one of those decks will certainly go before Ken sees a shot at them. And then I know my Who Brewed This teammate, Claire, wants to first pick Krark Sakashima. She loves the deck. She plays it a ton. And it's a tournament champion several times over at this point.
It's made so many top 4s at this point. Like crazy.
I think it's top 4s, top 16s. Like it has cemented itself as worthy of a spot at the top, in the top 10 picks of a tournament.
I totally agree with that.
So I honestly see neither Krark Thrasios nor Krark Sakashima falling to a place where Ken can get them. I think Ken will probably be able to wrap up Krark Timna. I love the chutzpah and the and the drive to make the petition, but I don't think it's gonna pan out this year.
So, we did talk, at length about the Teamer, really the blue-red based Krark decks, but there is the Krark Timna list, and is Hal gonna take a shot at Krark Timna? I mean, like that's the question there, is because I know a lot of people like Hal and Cobble and obviously Claire have talked about how they're really interested in Krark decks. I mean,
yeah.
Will Ken even get a shot at a Krark deck is the question.
I don't think that there's any chance of a Hal taking Krark Timna. Hal is an author of another Mardu deck on the deck list database, Timna Jeska Dummy Mommies. So I feel like Hal would be picking that before, say, what is it called? Is it called Vape Farm or Coin
I'm calling
Farm?
it Coin Farm. I
Okay,
refuse to call it Vape Farm.
We'll go with Coin Farm, but I think it's Vape Farm. I think Hal will be taking something like Timna Jeska before he'll take Krark Timna. Hal specifically likes Krark Sakashima, and I know that he'll be very disappointed when it inevitably does not make it down to him in the draft order. I just don't see a chance that he even sniffs Krark Sakashima.
So in a world where Thrasios Krark doesn't go to Cobblepot, Hal is picking 25th. That is after Ken. So does, Ken snag Thras Krark? Like, if Cobble doesn't take Thras Krark, does Thras Krark make it to down there to 18?
I doubt it.
I don't know.
I doubt it.
No, that's hard because like it's a very good deck. I mean, it's shown itself to be a very good deck, and I think people will be. Basically, it has all the components that you want to see, right? It can run Underworld Breach. It does Thrasios stuff. It runs just layers and layers of good cards. It's so I could definitely see that going well before Ken even gets a sniff at it. But I think there is still among players who have traditionally played more mainstream decks like a pretty harsh stigma against Krark decks that aren't Krark Sakashima. They're generally seen as like incredibly dirtily and that kind of thing, where those of us in the know that it's not true, right? But there's definitely a stigma,
right?
And so I could see that. I could see that getting down to Ken.
Okay.
I think it's pretty safely, if it makes it past Cobblepot, it'll get to Ken, and that's a prediction I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring on.
Okay.
I'm going to take the other side of that bet, and I'm going to say that they're gone before Ken first picks. And I hate to see it because I'd love to see Ken get his hands on any of the Krark decks, any breed, any brand of it. But I'm doubting that any of them make them down that far.
So if that's your prediction, then who would you see on this list taking Vape Farm then? Because that is the one deck on there that of the 3 Krark decks is the fringe one, right? Like Thrasios Krark has definitely, it's had tournament success. It's had, like, Shawnee's played it a lot. I know a lot of different people have played it a lot. I mean, who is the person who drafts that then is my question.
I'm really not sure. I mean, it's hard for me to say. I'm not really completely well versed with all of these players and what their favorites are. But I know that as a deck, I mean, it's good and it's going to put up results. And all of the brands of Krark decks right now are just doing the thing, and everybody loves them in the community right now. And they're just versatile. I think that it's such a good deck that I doubt that it's going to get down there. Again, I would love to be wrong. I absolutely would love to be wrong and get one of these decks in Ken's hands, but I see them picked highly, right? Cobble and Claire taking 2 of them would mean, the chances of the third one getting down to 18th pick slim.
You almost have to wonder if, given Ken is Ken is admittedly like quite a good player and did go through the process of, writing the whole thing. And you have to wonder if he set himself up to be hate drafted.
That's the thing.
By just expressing his desire to have all 3 Krark decks, he might have cemented that he gets none of them. Right?
Very, very true.
You have to wonder.
The other thing is, like, other players could just do the hat tip here and respectfully not pick a Krark deck so that Ken gets his hands on one of them. Like, that's the other side of this too.
Yeah, that's the other side of that coin.
Yeah. It's interesting because we were talking about how a lot of people are going to pick like their comfort decks, and I think you will see that in the top 5 for sure, with the exception of being like Michael Levine has made it pretty clear that he does not have intentions of drafting Heliod.
Yeah.
Like that is, I think if anybody drafts Heliod, it'll be Charles, and I don't even know if Charles will draft it.
Wow.
And I think we saw last year with it. I think it fell into the 4th round last year. Heliod. No one even expressed a lick of interest in it. So I feel like it's going to be another safe one to push until your later draft picks.
Well, the difference I will say about this year to last year is because of the limited availability of all the different, color pairings, there is a greater representation of white decks in this field than there was last year. But there's also a smaller representation of like the Sultai type commanders. Like last year, Sultai was like half the field, right? Like it was Sultai, Grixis, and then everything else. And so
the structured diversity in the decks and the color pairings, I think, is going to make for a wildly different meta than we've seen in the past, and that other tournaments have seen as well. And frankly, I'm all for it. It makes it incredibly hard to predict what's going when as well, when some of these traditionally strong color pairings, like the five color decks that players can get their hands on, get snapped up right away.
Well, let's take a crack at that then right now, because we've kind of identified that we see Najeela as one of the top picks, and probably if you're in the top and you're not solidly on I want this or I want that, you should probably go to some of those better decks. So it were. So when we're looking at the draft list, obviously we have identified Najeela as one of those top decks. What are some of the other, Chris, in your mind, top decks in this field, of that will be highly sought after?
Well, of the 5-color decks, Kenrith Stacks, Cody Turbonaws, they're up there as well. I mean, it's a little bit outdated and out of meta at this point, but Food Chain First Sliver as well. I've always been a fan of that list. It could use some updating for sure. But I mean, of that, like that's 4 of the 5-color decks that we could see go.
I have a,
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm very sorry. I have a suspicion that Food Chain First Sliver will go at pick 15.
Yeah.
Pick 15 is
Killstars.
Oh yeah,
Killstars.
I could see Killstars drafting that.
Traditionally, Food Chain First Sliver player. I know worked on the version of Food Chain Sliver with Breach with Pongo. It's just a deck that he really likes, and I think if it drops that far, if a 5-color deck drops that far, I think
yeah.
I mean, and we saw plenty of 5-color decks drop pretty far last year.
But that's because there were plenty of 5-color decks. That's the thing.
I think we only saw one make it out of round 2, though. Last year.
Was it Gigantha that made it out of round 2?
Gigantha, yes, and I picked that in round 3, so I know it dropped out of round 2. Yeah.
So kind of the interesting question here is, because we've kind of filled this out where we have Nick first picking Magna Clock combo. Okay, done deal. Second pick, we have Kenrith Stacks with Michael Levine, although we don't know for sure what Michael will take. I have a suspicion he might take Najeela, but he also might take Kenrith Stacks, and that would definitely be more in line with what he traditionally plays. But then you have going fourth, is Mord, who I feel very confidently will take Elsha if it's available to him immediately. And then Kabul won't take one of those top decks, and Claire wants Krark Sakashima right away. So when it comes to Deco, then they're at pick, 7. What do we think Deco's going to take? Like, if Najeela's available, obviously he takes Najeela, right?
If Najeela makes it to 7, Deco takes Najeela. And if Najeela doesn't make it to 7, Deco takes Korvold.
Okay. So Korvold is the thought process there, then.
I mean, that's... Deco plays... Korvold plays... Najeela plays Prosper or Florian, one of the two. So like some kind of Rakdos farm. That's where I'd see Deco going.
So Flower, I presume, will probably take one of the mono green decks. Probably something that she's comfortable with would be my guess.
Probably Selvala, maybe.
Yeah, I would say Selvala out of the 5 mono green decks.
Correct, but I'm going to make a wild, baseless prediction and say that at number 8, Flower takes either Wynota Stacks or Cody Turbonaws if it drops that long.
Interesting.
Wow.
And here's why. I have justification.
Let's hear it.
Flower traditionally plays mono green kind of decks. That's all I've ever seen her play, and I know she's probably has more cEDH experience than that, but I know that is kind of her bag, what she likes. But if you ask a bunch of cEDH players what the easiest Stacks deck to learn is, it's Wynota. And the easiest Turbonaws deck to learn is it's Cody or Blue Farm. So I think just with that, if you're going to pick something that's out of archetype for you, and I think it is within Flower's best interest to pick something that's out of archetype for her, because
more likely that it's going to wheel to round 2 if it's in her wheelhouse, right?
If it's mono green and her archetype, right? I think you take either the fastest deck that you can or one of the slowest decks that you can. and one of the ones that has like easier play patterns if it's out of archetype. Because I know that's what I would be looking to do. Yeah. And I know Flower is very savvy.
And we talked about this a little bit last year where we thought that Rog Silas was going to be kind of that really good like turn 1 deck. And that was one of the things where we ended up seeing Rog Silas be horrible in first spot because everybody just mulled down to interaction when they saw it, and it just was terrible in that spot. So it went completely the way that we didn't expect it. And then Anala on the other end of the spectrum just got turn one win going last. Which is what's really interesting about this multiplayer format is it never goes the way you think it's gonna. So Flower on something like Cody potentially. Do we have? I know Death plays with Mons very frequently. Do we have sort of a feel on where he might go?
Yeah, so I don't have any kind of feeling on Death. I mean, not someone I've interacted with a lot, kind of new to the game for me. So I'm just watching in anticipation like everybody else on Death. What about you?
I don't know. I don't know Death very well either. Haven't seen Death play. But you got to think that if they aren't comfort picking, then it's going to be one of the generically good lists, right? It's going to be something that has wheeled to 9th pick. Like 9th pick, it's very reasonable to pick up, again, one of the 5-color lists, a good 4-color list, one of the best, say, Grixis lists as well. Like the possibility of picking something before pick 10 is fantastic. It's still an open field.
He is, I know, a very big proponent of Tevish, and really likes Tevish decks. So I know he was very disappointed that Tevish Crom did not make it. Kind of jumping off of that, Armix Crom we spoke about earlier is a deck that we know is very hot right now, is very popular, has a ton of, people successfully.
That's a deck that has fans.
It has fans, right?
And like,
as opposed to Arden, where it has fan.
But as fan, exactly. One super fan,
one
right?
really big fan. But at least the card that I'm really into now is good, and good as a commander. It isn't just a little bit of not great. Anyhow, when it comes to some of these picks, now that we're starting to get into the double digits, do we think Armix Crom falls that far? And if it does, where do you guys see it going? Is a great question. I know I'm asking a lot of I don't know, but that's kind of what we're here to speculate.
Well, so we know that a handful of players are going to be comfort picking, which means that some of these generally accepted good lists that have some of the hype behind them right now might not be picked very highly in the favor of going with pet decks, the decks that people have the most reps with, which means we might see something like an Armix Crom drop to 16, 17, somewhere around there too.
I was actually going to say, I know that people that I would look to take Armix Crom if it falls past 10 are Kai and Hal, fellow spell seekers to Mikey and people that play with Mikey a lot, the originator of the deck. I could see it going that deep. Yeah. Or if it goes all the way down, if it manages to get to 26, I could see Shawnee taking it. If it doesn't go inside the top 10, because I think we're gonna see a lot of very good decks, just as a function of how stacked the deck pool is, fall outside of pick number 10.
Right.
So you could see Legends Grixis like legendary Grixis decks drop outside of the top 10.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
I mean,
go ahead. A
lot of the returning players are going to pick decks that they're most familiar with, right? So if it falls out of the new players, which are kind of the wild cards for us right now, we haven't seen what they've picked previously, apart from playing with them outside of the tournament setting. The returning players are probably going to pick decks that they've got the most reps with, or that put up results for them last year as well. And which means if some of these decks don't get picked by the new crop in those first 13 picks, they might fall outside of the first 24 picks entirely. So we can see late first round picks of like Kess mid-range as well.
Yes, yeah.
And that was an interesting thing that I was going to ask is, remember last year there was that race to who takes Razakats first? Because you know there were 3 players who were very familiar with it. Looking at this pool, does Spleen get to draft Razakats this year? or does this saying it mean that he won't?
You've sealed his fate.
Yeah, I wonder if it. So it's a very good deck that has like some tournament success. So I wonder if someone like Mana Dork or Mord, if they don't take Elsha, could possibly snag Razakats, or even Cobblepot, knowing that it's a good deck and wanting to not let Spleenface get it. Which is the reason that I drafted Razakats last year.
Everybody is very aware that
I play.
I think most people, I don't know if maybe this year they might not be as aware of it, but there was definitely a sense last year because Spleen had just come off that like tournament tear of do not let Morgan get Razakats. And I don't, in talking with players, I have not gotten that sense this year that Razakats has that same like scare.
It doesn't have that same. Yeah, it doesn't have that this year, and I think that is going to be very good for the person who ends up getting it. Because last year, when I had my Razakats games, people were ready for me. I'm talking about like having Grafdigger's Cage and stuff like just. People were ready for it, and I think this year, if we just chill on the Razakats hype, we can see a few Razakats win this year. So we gotta be quiet and be nice about it.
Gotta be quiet and nice about it.
Yeah, one of the things that I did want to bring up and discuss is that in the span between last year and this year, a lot of the players have become more known quantities to each other.
Right.
That's going to lead to things like metagaming and meta drafting in this. So you're going to get the spite drafts of make sure this player doesn't get this deck. And because of some of the flexibility in the deck lists now, and knowing that there's a bit tighter of meta and deck lists are known quantities, or at least archetypes are known quantities, we could be seeing some meta choices in 99s of decks as well once the picks are done too. And I think that's opening up a whole new dimension to this.
Well, especially when you...
That could throw a spanner in the works.
And I think that's a really good point, because especially the change from last year where you only played your divisional opponents twice. This year, you're playing them 4 times. You're now probably going to be building your decks in mind with what the other 3 people in your division are going to have. Because we saw this last year, winning your division is all you got to do to get in, and you just have to focus on buying yourself the ability to get to the playoff.
Yep.
And
if you're in the same division as the Ravens, you had to have someone who could tackle, who could block Ray Lewis, and who could,
Well, I mean, I'm over here wearing my Rams stuff, right? It's, whoever wins the NFC West. It was, but so kind of going down here, I know, Scoots, you've played with, he's going by Ryan now, but we've previously known him as Falcon. What are things that Falcon would be more akin to? He also goes by KQBJ on the... So maybe you aren't familiar with him. Okay. So I guess Ryan is an unknown quantity to everybody then.
Ryan is an unknown quantity. I think I've seen KQBJ, I think, on the Nexus, but I'm not familiar with him, no.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I do know to some extent, I believe you are familiar with Islane though, from Possibility Storm.
Yeah, in passing.
Okay.
In passing. I'm not I don't know as many players as I used to. I'll say that much. I've kind of gotten I've gotten old, right? Like, that's what it is. I've aged out of the cool kids club. But I do know Islane in passing, and I know Islane likes to play, say, spicier things.
Yeah.
I think Islane was on the train of was on the Nath train, I think, and was one of the people who was commenting on the post about how Nath didn't make it this year into the deck selection. I don't know Islane well, but I think I would honestly, in the absence of complete information, look to see them drafting something, I think, more Staxy to mid-range as their first pick. So I think there's definite like merit to something like Kenrith if it falls that far, or Winota maybe. Lathril, kind of the discard.
One of the decks
Bulgari.
that I
can't
know,
do Nath. Do the Nath we have at home in Lathril.
The Nath, Nath we have at home.
Yeah.
I know that he is a big fan of the what's it called, the Shorkai Polysceptor list that's going around. I do know that he also likes to play Mad Farm, and he plays specifically like the Rog Timna version of it.
Okay. Yeah.
And then he also has a primer for Sithis. And
Sithis,
if we're
Sithis
seeing
is the deck on the database.
Yeah, and so if we're seeing like comfort picks, Sithis is one that I could see going there too.
I could see Sithis wheeling really easily into a later round too.
I agree.
Yeah. I wonder if it might be strategically better to grab like a known commodity as your first pick, and then I think Sithis gets to round two.
Yeah.
Or traditionally Selesnya is not a dominating color in cEDH. You had green-white Sisay that was very good when Paradox Engine was legal and has fallen off some. You've had Sithis and Siona as the only other decks really doing it, other than Catilda more recently. So yeah, I think there's a really good chance that all the Selesnya decks go pretty late in the draft.
I'm really interested in seeing that Yasharn Stacks deck go.
Yeah. I know that there are definitely Yasharn players, and Yasharn is, I mean, it's one of those stacks pieces where like your fetches don't work and your dockside treasures don't work and everything is bad and you just kind of get punched to death by a pig for a half hour. But yeah, I could see that. I could see that as one of the stacks decks going.
So here's my question then for you, Chris, as we look down, is I know you've spoken with Jim. Where is Jim's headspace at with us? Because we know this is brand new time in there, and we know Jim is kind of like on tends to play like fringier established decks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I reached out to Jim to get his thoughts on the draft and where his head was at. And he's eyeing some of the decks that he's got reps with. Unsurprisingly, a lot of people are. But one of the names that he dropped is Winota Stacks. And if Winota Stacks doesn't go by 12th pick, I see Jim snapping it up.
That would be a really good. And it was interesting because remember last year, famously in Ian's video of the draft, he was shocked when it went in the first round because he thought he was going to have that just in his belt.
I think he called Braden a bad man.
But that's really interesting, and to kind of contrast from last year how people's opinions of certain things have changed. When we get to Adam Silverboy here, Adam could go a variety of ways. I know he plays Jessica, Jessica Ishai. He also he's a big Nath guy. if I had to predict where he would go here, I think if it's available to him at 13th, I could see Jessica Ishii going here at 13th, because
maybe Hepatra.
Oh my gosh.
Ishii.
Yeah. I don't see Jessica Ishii going before that. I mean, there's nobody that's, champing at the bit for it.
Well, Jessica Ishii is one of those decks that has a tremendous amount of hype behind it, due in no small part to the absolute degenerate memeing of the Hermit Druid on Twitter. It's another thing. It's another reason I expect to see Timna Dargo go pretty early.
Yeah.
Because there are definitely those people that love the Hermit Druid's decks for good reason. And I expect to see both of those decks that are included in this year's draft class go fairly early, honestly.
So interesting question then, like an interesting hypothetical. Traditionally, we've kind of been like Timna Thrasios, best partner pairing. You're always going to like, those are always going to be like kind of thought of as the best cEDH decks, and like more people who aren't super into it, whatever. Where do you think realistically the first Thrasios Timna deck gets drafted? Where at, by who, in which one do you think it is? And I'll throw that answer first at Scoots.
So the first Thrasios Timna deck is, oh gosh, that's hard. So Ashani has been playing a ton of Hulk and Hermit in preparation. So if a deck drops as far, I think the first Thrasios Timna deck, oh gosh, this is so hard. I would say as early as number 7 and Deco. And then after that, I would say probably Spleenface and or Sick Robot next. And then if it gets down to 25, Pongo might take Sacred Druid, the Hermit Druid Sacred Guide combo, and then Ashani. So I would say earliest number 7, latest 26 is my
interesting
kind of rough estimation. But I think that there's probably 4 spots it could go.
Yeah. And there's five Thrasios Timna decks. So, Chris, when you look at that, is there anything that jumps out to you as like, of those 5 that you think is going to be the most appealing, in where?
Well, I mean, we had already mentioned Razakats, right? And the kind of the stigma behind that deck as well. Are people going to be looking for it? Are people going to be ready for it? Are people going to not pick it because it's got this this reputation to it? But oh god, I can still see it going early, and not necessarily early in round 1, but I can see it going in round 1, right?
Yeah.
It's wild to me to think that TNT deck could potentially go in round 3, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's 5 of them, right? There are 5 of them, and I know personally, having played a lot of games, that I've seen Razakats fall off like significantly compared to this time last year. I am the only one in my friend circle and like group of people still playing Razakats.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of like Hermit Druid experimentation, so I could see that going earlier than Cats. I could see some Hulk builds going earlier than Cats. I know Comedian has done a Rule of Law Hulk build, and Ashani's doing Breakfast Hulk basically with pattern, Rector pattern stuff. And so I could see that going early. I could see CST. So as a little bit of inside baseball, I just did coverage for the cEDH Playmax tournament. And there were 4 Thrasios and Timna decks, and 3 of them were CST variants. So I could see CST happening early too, before any other deck, because it's just solid. Or before any other Thrasios Tymna deck, because it's just solid mid-range TNT. So, honestly, Razakats might not be the bogeyman this year that it was last year, and I could see it going into round 2. Yeah, easy.
Yeah, that would be quite the shock, honestly.
It would be, but
and just the fact that any of these TNT decks could drop to like a 3rd round pick is astounding. It speaks to the diversity of the format, but again, just the traditionally thought of best partner pairing,
right? Going
that late in the draft because people want to get their hands on the decks that they have the most reps with, or they want to get their hands on meta decks in here as well. The fact that some of these generically good decks could go that late, again, it's up in the air.
So one interesting thing is, I think these like the people specifically who played in the playoff picks. So we're looking Pongo down, and that's really where I think there's Rebels already said she's rando drafting again. I told her her though that if she's not there in person doing it, I'm picking her decks, and they will not be fun. So that is just me telling her, you have to be here rolling the dice yourself. We're not having Cameron do it for you again. But you know, so outside of Rebel, because she could do anything. She might random pick. She might actually come in with a strategy. Who knows?
She's got lists in the draft herself. Right?
She's got several.
Yeah. So I mean, she could just go and pick her lists. Like that's a thing too.
Famously, though, Sisay Gigantha did not make the 5-color lists. But.
No, but the reality chip I know is Rebel's list in the draft. Mm-hmm. So I mean, if Jim doesn't pick it for the memes.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's his jellyfish child,
jellyfish
right?
son.
I love that shirt exists, by the way.
Yeah, for real.
So when we get down into we discussed Shawnee. Shawnee's been really high on Hulk, and I think that if like Breakfast Hulk or Rectorfit get down there, I think Shawnee would probably pick Breakfast Hulk before he picked Rectorfit, because Rectorfit does make you have to play both Rectors, because of the archetype restriction.
Yeah.
But so outside of that, you know, Pongo might be able to go a lot of different ways based on how this is going. I mean, like, what do you think might end up happening for Pongo here?
Yikes.
I'll get it out of the way early. Najila is not making it down.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll throw that out there.
Najila doesn't get past Deco.
If there's whispers of it getting down that low, someone will hate draft it out from under Pongo. But past that, I think Pongo has a lot of experience, unlike Kenrith Stacks. Pongo has a lot of Thrasios and Tymna experience. So I would look to see a Thrasios and Tymna deck being taken by Pongo as pick one, or if Pongo wanted to play a more meta deck, I honestly see one of the Grixis decks making it that low, whether it's Jaleva or Kess or
absolutely. I'm
there's a ton of options. I mean, I could even see Ikrom making it that low, like green Grixis. I could even see that.
He did play
that low in the draft.
Ikrom last year.
So, exactly. I'm thinking
not unreasonable.
I think there's a shot it makes it that low.
Yeah, and these returning players, again, they're going to play decks that put up results for them last year. And even if they're ones that they picked in later rounds last draft, they're going to pick a lot earlier this round if they overperformed last year.
It'll be interesting to see so in a world where somehow Winota Stacks gets down to 25th, I don't think it does.
No.
But I think Pongo would take Winota if it drops to him. Sure. But I don't know that it does. One of the wild cards here is Charles, because we know Charles has the way he plays. And so the question is, there's a lot of decks that he likes to play that are here. I know that Ow is his deck. I know that, Jesus, what else is there? There's Death and Taxes, Yoshimaru Kelleth. There's Elishnorn, like you said. But I could also see him going with Shorakai, right? Like, there's a handful of ways that Charles could go.
I don't think it's going to make it that deep.
Shorakai?
Yeah.
I don't
There's
think
two different
Shorakai
lists, though. There's Shiftlash and there's Polyscepter.
Oh, okay. See, I don't see Polyscepter making it that low. Shorakai has an insane amount of hype right now. It's a two-color deck that can play Scepter and Humility and Poly-Tyrant lines and just work, which is kind of unheard of, except maybe by like Tevesh Ishai type decks. So I think Shorakai, it's so hyped right now because it just came out. There's a ton of people playing it, and it just had some pretty decent success in a recent tournament. So I see Shorakai. Maybe both lists going in the first round before they get to Charles, at least one.
I would say at least the poly list.
Yeah. The poly list, I know several people have their eyes on, and is just like a very high deck for a lot of people. Interesting. I think the Ow deck is a deck that only Charles will draft. But the thing is that is very dangerous because the Ow deck is quite strong.
I don't know if it's something that only Charles will draft because, like, traditionally Josh of Mind Muscle Magic really enjoys playing these more off the beaten path, low color decks that have like harder combos or no combos to execute and can kind of win like that. That's kind of been a Josh staple. Josh notable Brina the Demigod player. Like, so I think there's a chance that some of this mono white stuff goes to players that aren't Charles.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, we have two of the mono white guys are playing this year. So you would assume some amount of white decks do get played by a non-Charles player. Also, now looking at LJ last year had the first pick. We were like, is he going to pick Edric? He didn't pick Edric. He picked Najeela.
Yeah.
Do you think he's going to pick Edric again? Or do you think he thinks it wheels back to him at 60? Or you know LJ probably better than anybody here. So, I mean, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
I think LJ will not pick Edric in the first round. I don't think that there's too many other players who play Edric in the current draft class.
I can tell you there's one that's put it.
Is there one named Jim, Spike Feeder Jim?
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, if Jim snags Edric out from under LJ, I'm sure LJ will play 3 other decks that play like
Edric.
that play like Edric, you know? Like last year, LJ described his draft picks as varying color combinations of Edric, right? With Najeela and Belby and Edric, and I can't remember the last one.
What was his fourth deck? Hold on. I do have that pulled up. His fourth deck was Tassiger Neoform.
Yeah. So I think LJ will be just fine if he doesn't get Edric, so I don't think he's going to prioritize getting Edric as first pick. I think he'll probably try to take it second or third round if it gets to him. But LJ is an absolute axe murderer of a cEDH player and could play like Twilight Sparkle Hulk and win games against people. So
picking 28th each round, you've got to be very careful about hoping something wheels because there are a lot of people picking before you. And that's to be said for all of our returning players here, right? Everybody who made it to the finals, everybody who made it to the Mox Bowl, you've got to be very careful about kind of crossing your fingers and wishing on a star that your deck wheels.
But I think the other thing that you also have to do is like very much prioritize getting the best deck you can for the pick rather than a comfort pick when you're drafting that low in the deck. In the draft.
And I think that's an interesting thing here, because as we look at these last four, these were the four that made it to the Mox Bowl last year. So we have Hire, Rebel, Cicada, and Ian. And all four of those are players that I feel like I could put any deck in their hands.
Absolutely.
And
well, that's the thing, right? Like last year, Rebel random picked and still made it to the Mox Bowl. Cicada picked just 4 decks that were kind of cEDH decks, and like he played Animar last year into the Mox Bowl, like
which Callahan, you and I went back and forth on the pick last year too when we analyzed the draft, right?
They're just all killer players, and it doesn't matter what deck that you hand them. I would not doubt that all 4 players who appeared in the Mox Bowl last year will place into the playoffs and into the top 8 and into like on and on and on. They're great players, and you cannot keep them out of the playoffs.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's
think there's a big portion of new players in here as well, and how many of them are going to elbow some of these well-known good players out of these very comfortable spots that they might be parking themselves in.
Well, I think too, when you look at the conferences, so let's look at some of these new players, and you really are going to see this impacted more in the Coalition Conference, where obviously, so the North is going to be a hellscape for whoever has to play in that division. For those of you who didn't watch last week, it is Ian, Pongo, Sick Robot, and Spleenface, and they play 4 times. That is what I have called. I think we need to rename that division from the North Division to the
Meat Grinder
the
Conference.
Meat Grinder.
Well, I was going to say the Team Turn 3 Conference or division. Like
there you go.
But like all 4 of those are people where it's like they're all going to get a chance to go first. They're all going to. So it's really like. I think we talked about this last week a little bit, is for those 4, their out of division games are going to end up being huge for them because I could see each of them picking a win in division.
Yeah, they're going to be one. All of them are going to be 1 and 3 in their division. Yeah.
Looking over, and we talked about now, this is the division that I think has the most shakeup is this South division, where we have Claire, we have Killstars, we have Manadork, and we have Shawnee. And, we know
it's literally 1 returning player.
Yeah, so there's only one. No, there's 2 returning.
Killstars, but Killstars
didn't get to draft last year. So Killstars we'll actually get to see him draft this year, which is really neat for him.
Yeah. Which is exciting.
So that division, that's going to get shook up. The real thing, though, is the East, where now Rebel has Cobblepot. Rebel and Kai have Cobblepot in that division.
Cobblepot to contend with,
and we've effectively replaced Charles with Cobblepot. And Cobblepot is one of those players who, when he does play in tournaments, he tends to finish quite highly.
He's absolutely no slouch.
The other interesting thing is when you consider what decks they're gonna be drafting. Cobblepot also tends to play Staxier decks, I think is fair to say. Like,
kind of. I think so. I mean, Fairer Magic is Cobblepot's like love letter to slow games, but certainly something he's notable for. But I think also Cobblepot just plays strong mid-range decks, right? That's a lot of what I noticed, especially if you look at decks that he's played like Thrasios Krark and Temur Pirates and decks like that. Excuse me, I just wanted to say it's now called Tropical Malcolm. Sorry, Zane, if you're listening. I know it's not Temur Pirates anymore because there's only 3 pirates.
I've always just called it Temur Malcolm. But
it's Tropical Malcolm now.
All right.
But yeah, I think I would look to see Cobblepot just draft basically a bunch of mid-range decks. If it just seems on brand.
Yeah.
Lots of decks with political bargaining chips and chances for him to. One of the great things about Cobblepot, playing with Cobblepot, as you well know, is his just his ability to get what he wants by opening his mouth. Like he just like, hey, you should do this, and someone goes, why should I do that? And he'll be like, reason, and then they're like, oh, okay, sure, I'll do it.
So
whatever you want.
Here's an interesting question about a strategy like that, drafting all mid-range decks, is you are playing in your division 4 times. And if somebody knows that all 4 decks you're bringing to the table are mid-range decks, again, what's the meta call there if you know that at least one of your opponents is bringing nothing but mid-range decks?
It's one of those things where I think people can say that, like, oh, mid-range is bad into turbo, but good into stacks or whatever. But the variability of 4 different players at the table, it would have to be a fairly concerted effort by the rest of the table to hose the person who drafted 4 mid-range decks to be like, oh, let's all 4 play our turbo decks every time we play against this person. That you're not going to see it. And I honestly think that what's going to happen is that if people will behind the scenes say, let's all play our turbo decks against the mid-range player, and then 2 of them are going to play stacks to the turbo player.
You get the rock, paper, scissors.
Just
Absolutely.
how it works out. That's how it worked out last year. That's how it works out in tournaments. People position themselves, and
I mean, when you've got a juggernaut like Cobble in your division, you got to think that the players are on their toes about knowing, pet decks, knowing pet archetypes, and making meta calls like that. It's not just what deck are you most comfortable with, but what's going to work against the players in your division.
So
Absolutely.
What decks do we kind of suspect Hire will be going after? I know he drafted, Selvala last year. He took it to the playoffs. I doubt he'd take Selvala first round, but, what are the type of things that you think he might be going after?
I don't think Selvala will make it to Hire in first round.
Hire will try to steal Kinnan if Hire can. Hire's played a ton of like a mid-rangier build of Kinnan that still plays the mirror lines, but also plays Void Winnower, and I think that's within kind of the restrictions of the whole thing. So he'll try to play like a mid-rangey Kinnan. If like 5-color Evolution, Kenrith Evolution gets to him, that's a Hire deck. But the thing is that I think Hire has been kind of trying to diversify the decks that he's playing lately and the angles that he's been taking on decks. And I think he is a very adaptive player, so will just take whatever comes to him. I don't know that. I think Hire definitely has picks that he'd like to take as 1 and 2. I think that's going to be Kinnan and Kenrith Evolution. But I think that Hire will absolutely destroy on whatever deck falls to him. It's just he's a very adaptive player. Outside of Kenrith Evolution, maybe one of the 4-color lists, like I could see Hire taking something like Wild Pile or Foresee Omnath or Advantage Thrasios.
So you think Sage would pass on
Dawnwaker?
4-color?
Yeah, I was going to say Sage is not passing
I
on
think
Foresee
Sage is
Omnath.
going to. Yeah, okay, that's true. I think Sage is probably going to pick one Omnath, but if Sage does not pick one Omnath, and Sage might here's the thing, Sage might pick one Valky.
That's also true.
That's true, but also I don't see Valky getting picked by anybody else round 1.
Yeah.
So that could be a safe wheel.
I'm wondering if people are going to like we said earlier, I think people might comfort draft in round 1. So I think you might see Sage take Valky round 1. I know Sage loves Valky. And
they were very excited when they saw it was in the draft.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke with Sage as well just to get their opinions on it, and I know that they're very much going with their comfort zone. So
yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
Omnath is probably not safe, but I would look to see higher play 4 or 5 color decks, provided Kinnan and Kenrith don't get knocked to him.
So here as we wrap things up, I know that, there's a ton of lists that are on here, but what are some of your sleeper picks of decks that people might not be thinking of are great right off the bat, but maybe should be thinking about and might end up in like the 3rd or 4th round? And Chris, I'll toss this one over to you of some of the decks that really caught your eye.
So, I mean, we talked about this when the list of decks was revealed, but I love the emphasis on some new commanders in here and new legends, decks that weren't possible during last year's season. I love the Greasefang list.
Me too.
Big fan of it. I think that that's a spicy one that I'd love to see. And I don't know how highly it's going to go because, again, newer lists mean people have had less reps with them as well. So people are going to fall into their comfort zone and let some of these newer things wheel a little bit. But I'm still really excited. Like I said, Yasharn Stacks as well. There are some spicy lists. And I am a huge fan of like really fringe decks like Zata Storm too. I know that they're not going to go highly, but whoever gets them is just going to have a blast.
Well, that's one of Timmy's decks, right? Like, I could see Timmy taking that.
Timmy loves Zata for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I said this last year too, Orvar. I'm a massive fan of Orvar. It's one of the decks that I play.
Yeah.
I don't know how early it's going to go, but it's a deck that I always love seeing pop off too. So I want to see some players get their hands on some of the newer lists in here, some of the newer commanders, and see what they can do in these environments. Like the Toxrill list, Toxrill Control. I want to see how it stacks up against some of these lists for sure.
That's another thing, not to, start a new topic as we're wrapping up, but we talked about decks that have a lot of hype, and Toxrill is one of those decks that has a lot of that hype behind it.
I just need to interject real quick. Hashtag slug club. Thank you.
I mean, look, all right. Can I throw up the rat gangs for the Grease Fangs?
Absolutely, of course.
I'm a big fan of the Grease Fang list. I know Death plays a Grease Fang list, so I could see Death taking it like in some round if Jim doesn't take it. Those are the two players that I would see playing Grease Fang. But Toxrill Scoots, that's your slug fam, right? Your slug baby.
That is yeah.
Where do you foresee that going?
It's hard to say, right? Because here's the scenario that I see with Toxrill. Last year, as my 4th pick, I drafted Edgar Markov Razakats, and then was able to pick up off the waiver wire Kel's Dimir Scepter. Toxrill occupies a similar place in the draft pantheon for me as Kel's Dimir Scepter. I think it is just a better version of Kel's, honestly. The bomb in the command zone makes it better Kel's to me. So I could see Toxrill falling very far down before anyone picks it up. And I do not see many Toxrill players in the list, right, of players. However, the thing that could seriously propel Toxrill higher up is if people look at their divisions and the decks that their division rivals are playing. And if they're creature heavy, like if Selvala is into your division and you want the pick that makes elves just terrible to play, you could definitely take Toxrill for that matchup.
It's Toxrill or Hepatra, right? I mean, those are the meta calls on that kind of stuff.
And we saw Hepatra do well last year too.
Right. And we were kind of shocked how early Hapatra went. I think Hapatra went like late round 2, early round 3, something like that last year. And
Phoenix was letting chat draft for him. He picked it 4th. Hapatra did.
Okay.
So Hapatra went 104. But we saw like Zur drop all the way down to the 3rd round. Like, does anybody have eyes on Zur this year, do you think?
Yes. I think Helenium might want Zur. I think Kai might want Zur. I think Ian, comedian, might look at Zur as like a dark horse pick. I mean, you are in Esper. How bad can it be? Yeah,
it'll be interesting.
So that's one of the questions here. With the diversity in the color pairings and the commanders here, are we seeing any of the color pairings fall behind because there's fewer of them, or there's better picks in more colors? Are we seeing some of the decks with running fewer colors, the 1 and the 2 color decks, be last picks or not picked based on the volume of 3 color, 4 color, 5 color decks we have?
I think we'll look to see the Gruul decks and the Boros decks taking a serious hit outside of maybe 1 or 2 decks in those categories. Rurikthar from Gruul and Winota from Boros, I think, are the 2 that people think about when they think of cEDH decks in those colors. And I think we could see Orzhov take hits into the late rounds. I think there's a couple decks in that list that play Tymna, which is
3 of them.
Probably things that,
and Cal,
which is things that people will consider.
Might not get picked highly. Just want to set your expectation there.
I just want to prepare you for that. Yeah.
I expect Arden Crom though to go to Silverboy. Probably in like the 2nd round, realistically, because I could see Adam, if he gets the opportunity to play Jessica Ishai and then wheel around and then get to play Arden Crom, because he already plays like a Jessica Ishai version of Arden Crom. So I could see him very quickly going, okay, here's Jeskai Tempo, here's Arden Crom. I have 2 decks that I'm very comfortable with. And then go from there. Because, like, you know, the Golgari decks that are in the field, like Lathril, like, I could see Lathril going very late to him. And that's a very Nath-esque type of deck, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So I guess...
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the 2 color pairings, and I'm thinking, like, there's probably going to be a handful of these that are left over at the end in favor of the 3 and the 4 color pairings that we have.
I mean, there's going to be 27 decks that are going to be undrafted.
Yeah.
So there will be undoubtedly decks that do not get picked.
I just want to say, though, to contestants, I am offering a cash reward if you win a game on Kodama Tago. So I will Venmo you $5.
So I was going to talk about Kodama Tago because I am a huge fan of the Kodama Vile Smasher build. That's basically Kodama Tago with extra steps. And I know for a fact that Jim has played it as well. So, I mean, like... I could see that like a very late pick because he does have reps with it. So.
I know 3 people in the MLC chat, and I can't remember who, but I remember when they saw the list or the draft class, were very excited that Kodama Tago was on there.
Hell yes.
3 people were quite excited. So that is...
Well, I'm quite excited, obviously.
In all fairness, we had to fill out Gruul, and there's...
Oh, yeah. There's
only so many times that you can put in like Snoop this, Snoop that before you're like, okay, we need something else. You know, kind of when we look at going back to the Dark Horse picks, you know, Scoots, what are your kind of, what's on your radar as picks that you don't, or you think will surprise people with how well they do?
So for me, I'm looking at number 1, Baby Blue Farm Forcey Luris. I think that is going to go later in the draft, and I think people are going to be blown away by how consistent it is. And it's 4 colors, so obviously it's just a bunch of good cards.
My hot take is it is a better turbo deck than Blue Farm is, or it is better at being a Nas deck than Blue Farm is.
But it is. I think a worse deck.
I would
than
agree
Blue
with
Farm,
that.
but better at being a turbo Nas deck.
It's much better at being a turbo Nas deck than Blue Farm is, which is how people tend to play Blue Farm. And Blue Farm is much better at being just like a mid-range ad Nas deck.
Yeah, I think that there is a very good chance that we see Malcolm Timna go very late, and that is a very good deck that makes a ton of mana and cracks Doomsday.
Now, are you talking Esper Farm or are you talking Esper Doomsday? Because we did separate those.
Esper Doomsday specifically. I think we're going to see that go a little late, and I think it is a very good deck. I think it's one of those decks that is like Zur, that people think is maybe better in one more color type of thing. So that I think that's going to influence people's picks a little bit. And then the other deck that I am super, super, super high on is Jund Dargo. I think that deck is going to, again, go late, but it is just incredibly... has the potential to be incredibly fast.
It's so explosive.
It plays all the best cards in Jund, and it has a 7/5 in the command zone if worse comes to worse. Like, I think that deck is going to also do very well should it get drafted.
I'm curious if Ken might draft that, because I know he really liked playing Jund Jessica last year. And he had good success with Jund Jessica. So it'll be interesting to see, because we've kind of established Ken is not getting his meatball baby.
Probably not getting Krark. Yeah.
So, it'll be interesting to now see where Ken goes with that. And, we do have a whole tournament in between now and the draft. So that'll be... we do have Marchesa. So so the closing thought, I guess, would be, do we think Marchesa and how Marchesa plays out will have an influence on the way people draft?
I think so, personally. I think that people are going to definitely take note of some of the top performers. And I think it's going to inform the meta as well. Like it's definitely one that people are going to take cues from. Whether they're watching the tapes or not, whether they're dissecting things, it's one that people are going to take cues from, without a doubt.
I also feel like there's a fair amount of people attending the Marchesa event and bringing a deck that they intend to test for the purposes of playing in the MLC. I know that to be the case with at least
that makes me super proud that I have a thing that's worthy of that. That Marchesa is the testing ground for that.
I think that we're going to see the recent Playmax tournament and Marchesa influence the picks that people make in the MLC. Absolutely. There's no way that they couldn't, right? Like, you're looking for data, for representative data, and what better place to get it than at a gathering of cEDH players.
Right. Yeah, and it's going to be more representative than some of the other metas and testing grounds that we've got to compare against, considering that actual players in the MLC are going to be playing in Marchesa. I think it's going to be.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them. We know, like Spleenface and Sick Robot are going to be there. Ian Rebel, I believe Hire is going to be there. Helenium, Kai. I'll be there. Michael will be there. It is a big, a lot of the people playing in this. Josh was going to be there too. I forgot about that. Josh is going to be there. It'll be really interesting to see how that all plays out, and to see how that influences the draft, on how people end up deciding that, because it's a week after Marchesa. So
note down what people are playing in Marchesa.
Yeah.
Because you'll probably see it in their picks for the MLC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming by and breaking down the draft. We are going to be taking this week off. This next coming week because of Marchesa. I am going, like I said, I'm going to be there. I believe almost all of the Sculpty boys are going to be there. I think you aren't there. Scoots, Cobblepot's not going to be there. Sage won't be there, and then Max won't be there. And those are the only 4 who won't be at Marchesa, and the rest of us are going to be there. So if you want to come say hi and get a game in with us, I'm not even playing in the tournament. So I'm just there for the fun. If you want to come and get a game, come and say hi. Phoenix and I will be hanging out and playing games and willing to talk about people. But like I said, there won't be a podcast episode next Monday. The Monday after, I am hoping that our draft recording session will be our episode for that day. So we'll see how that goes. I might, I'm trying to work a couple things out to have a good, podcast episode for that. But we'll have some sort of draft recap in some form or another for you the Monday after. But from here on out, it's MLC coverage on the Mind Sculptors, baby. It's unfortunately, once like March hits, it's like from March till April, the MLC is just such a big undertaking that it takes up so much of my time. And, and I've tried to make it easier on the players so you guys don't have to put aside your entire summer. But, but with that being said, that about wraps things up for us here today. If you want to find out anything about the MLC, I will remind you, go follow the MLC on Twitter at MLC_league. That is going to be the best place to get more information about the league, as well as our videos. If you also want more information, we'll be sharing that on the Sculpty Boys Twitter as well. So you can follow us there at Sculpty Boys, or there's a direct link to it in our link tree in the description below. Want to give a special shout out to a few of our patrons: Justin, CZ, David Snavely, Dionyches, Jason Bialik, Matt Boehner, and Senior Coupon. Those are some of our top tier patrons. Want to also say that if you want to come onto the show, we do have a patron level now for 2 people that if you sign up for it, we're going to do a quarterly patron episode if people subscribe to it. So if you want to subscribe to that patron tier in Talk Magic with us, that is an option for you. So we can organize those sorts of things. So like I said, if you want to support us, you want to be on the show, go down to Patreon. That is a great way to help not only support the MLC, but help support the Mind Sculptors. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for joining us both today and from all of us here at the Mind Sculptors. I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.
I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, light up ties in the hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, through that I survived, doing 80 to the house. Then I hit her to the sky, changed haters on a tirade. Talking to their grip in the face, be still, let that hit stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna live like I'm trying to reach enlightenment. Trail spill from my lips, feel big from the bib. Take a sip till I pass out. Try and get grit, but it don't make sense, cause you can lose life on this fast route. Yeah, turn thoughts to a cash cow. I might flip that to the glass house. I don't need the accolades, I'm in love with the chase. I just wanna eat, save a spot at the table. Beast with the slap, pin myself on the map. You long with the wind, but we knowing that it's cap. 5-hour flights myself to the page. I don't do it for